Hey everybody, this is Benny Ricciardi with rotocurve.com, and I'm here with some DraftKings cash game plays for your NFL action for week 12. There's quite a few options that we do have to consider, but there's a couple guys who stood out to us that we're going to mention. So let me call up our PowerPoint presentation and we'll talk about them. These are some of the cash game targets who we're looking at for the week. At the quarterback position, we really like Carson Palmer if you're paying up and Josh McCown if you're paying down. There's a lot of value in the running back space this week. So guys like Thomas Rawls and Javarius Allen are two of the ones that we think are going to be pretty solid plays for you in your cash games this week. Wide receivers, a spot where we think you got to pay up. DeAndre Hopkins is in a beautiful spot here. And Larry Fitzgerald is another guy who's just been very, very consistent. The mid-range tight ends is the way that we like to go. Delaney Walker and Jordan Reed both have phenomenal matchups that we'll talk about in a minute. And the chalk defense for cash games this week is going to be the Arizona Cardinals going up against the San Francisco 49ers. At the quarterback spot, the two guys we're looking at, Carson Palmer is the first one we're going to talk about. Palmer has reached value every week so far this season. He's having one of the best seasons that he's had in a really long time. Arizona is expected to score 27 points in this game, so we should see some passing touchdowns. And Carson Palmer is averaging over 300 yards and 2.7 touchdowns per game. So just based on the metrics right there with his averages, you're looking at 15 points for the passing yards and probably another 8 to 10 points out of the touchdowns, which would give him a score of somewhere in the range of 23 to 25 points, which would be more than 3 times value on his $7,100 price tag. That's an excellent cash game play, a great spot for him there. If you're going to pay up for anybody, we think Carson Palmer is probably the guy you should be looking at. Now, if you're somebody who likes to go with the cheap quarterback option, I think Josh McCown is probably the guy who's in the best spot. With all the craziness surrounding Johnny Football, Josh McCown has been reinserted as the starter this week for the Cleveland Browns. This is a perfect week for it to happen as they face a very weak Baltimore pass defense who's been giving up big fantasy scores to both quarterbacks and wide receivers so far this season. McCown had 6 starts so far this year, and in those 6 starts, he's thrown for 1,850 yards and 6 touchdowns. I'm sorry, that's supposed to be 11 touchdowns on the season. So he's basically averaging just a tad under 2 touchdown passes per game and a little bit over 300 yards, which puts him pretty close to the numbers that Carson Palmer's putting up at a price that's $2,100 cheaper. If you're looking for a guy who can get you good value based on his his price tag this week, Josh McCown is definitely the guy you should be looking at. Now, we have a lot of cheap running back options this week, a whole bunch of guys in that mid $4,000 range. 2 that I like the best for cash games are going to be Thomas Rawls and Javarius Allen. Rawls is going to see huge volume. On running downs, on passing downs, goal line downs, he's going to be the back that's going to be in there for the Seattle Seahawks. He has a tougher matchup this week against a pretty solid Pittsburgh run D, but I still think that he's too cheap not to use in cash games, based just off the fact that he's going to see huge volume, and he is a running back that does have a little bit of talent. At 4,500, he probably only needs to get you about 15 points, and I think he's got a really good chance of doing that when you add up the rushing yards, the receiving yards, the receptions, and the chance for him to get some possible touchdowns as well. On the other side, Javarius Allen is the new lead back in Baltimore after Justin Forsett went out of the game last week and is going to be out for the rest of the season. Allen faces a horrible Cleveland run defense who's been giving up the most fantasy. Well, actually, they're about 3rd or 4th right now, but they were giving up the most fantasy points to running backs. Definitely a team that we've been picking on all year with running backs and the team that we're going to be targeting here again. Allen is a great pass catcher out of the backfield, and that pretty much makes him game script proof. Even if this game kind of gets away from Baltimore, which some people are expecting that it might, you're still going to see Allen in there as somebody catching passes. At a $4,600 price tag, again, he's the same as Rawls. You probably need about 15 points. The catches that he gets, the yards that he gets, the chances for a touchdown, all those things could help him reach that 15-point plateau and even give him some upside where he could see 20 or 25 points in this game if he has a pretty good situation. Moving on from the running backs, we're going to talk about some wide receivers now. DeAndre Hopkins is going to be the chalk play for the week. Guy sees a ton of targets. He's playing in a game with the highest total. And he's going up against the Saints pass defense, who has given up huge numbers to wide receivers. The Saints, basically targeting wide receivers and quarterbacks against the Saints has been something that's been profitable all season long. And when you get a high target guy like Hopkins and a team that runs a high tempo offense like the Houston Texans, this should be a game where he sees 10 plus targets, comes down with, 7 to 10 catches, 100 yards, and probably gets in the end zone at least once with the high total. So even though Hopkins is an expensive play at 9,100, we do think he's one of the chalk plays, and he's going to be somebody that a lot of your opponents have. He was 42% owned in some of the Thursday lock tournaments over on FanDuel this week. So I think he's going to be the guy that everybody gravitates to when they're paying up. And, there is a lot of merit to doing so because he is in a very good spot. Another guy who I'm going to talk about, one of my favorite cash game plays at wide receiver every week, is Larry Fitzgerald. He's just a consistent target for Carson Palmer. He's the only fully healthy wide receiver that they have, with both John Brown and Michael Floyd being banged up, although we should see some Brown and Floyd in this game as well. Fitzgerald sees targets, he makes catches, he gets yards, and he scores touchdowns. That's exactly what you want out of a guy that you're going to start. He's consistent. He sees those targets every game, somewhere between 8 and 10. He makes somewhere between 5 and 8 catches every game, gets somewhere between 70 and 100 yards every game, and he scores touchdowns. I think he has about 6 of them already on the season. So this is a guy who can get you a solid 15 to 25 fantasy points and has the upside that we've seen already where he can go for 30 or 40 if he has a big game. The tight end spot this week is pretty easy for me. Delaney Walker at 5,400. He's the most targeted pass catcher on that Tennessee team. They face Oakland's tight end defense, which is now ranked second worst in the league and has given up some huge games all season long. And Delaney Walker is a guy who sees targets in the red zone, sees targets outside of the red zone. He's going to see probably about 8 or 9 targets today. He could come up with 6 or 7 catches for 50 to 70 yards. Probably get you a touchdown as well, and that would be more than enough to pay off his salary at 5,400. The other guy who we're going to be looking at is Jordan Reed. He has the second most targets of any tight end in the league per game. He missed a couple games, otherwise he would be up there for total targets as well. The Giants are really bad against tight ends. They give up the most fantasy points to the tight end position, mostly because they have very slow linebackers, and the slow linebackers that they have, are not able to keep up in coverage with a guy like Jordan Reed. Reed is the favorite target for Kirk Cousins, so there's a good chance that he's going to see somewhere between 8 and 11 targets in this game here. We think that Washington is going to have to throw the ball a little bit more to keep up. And remember, the Giants are a high-paced team that runs a lot of plays. So when they run a lot of plays, the other team actually gets a few more plays, and that usually benefits the guys who have the highest usage. Jordan Reed, being one of the guys who sees the most targets, is one of the more highly used pass catchers that they have on the Washington Redskins team. So he's going to be somebody who benefits from going up against a fast-paced Giants team, especially a fast-paced Giants team that struggles stopping tight end position. The last team we're going to talk about for cash is going to be our defense, and that's going to be the Arizona Cardinals. They're a big favorite against the San Francisco 49ers. San Francisco has the lowest expected total this week by Vegas, and they're the biggest underdog on the board. Blaine Gabbert's their starting QB. They're down to using their 4th running back and 2 guys they just picked up off the street. And Arizona is a team that can get a lot of pressure and force a lot of turnovers. They have a very good ball hawking defense. They also have a really solid pass rush that can get to the quarterback and create some pressure. If Arizona is able to get a lead, which they should be because we expect Carson Palmer to throw the ball all over the San Francisco defense, Arizona is going to be able to force San Francisco to abandon the run. And if you're going to force Blaine Gabbert to drop back 30 to 40 times, we saw what happened when you had to do that last year at Jacksonville. And it's usually not a good situation for his team, and it's usually a pretty good situation for the fantasy team that's going up against them. So if we're going to use anybody in cash games, I don't see much of a reason to go away from the Arizona Cardinals. I think they're probably the chalk play on the week, to be honest. So that kind of sums it up for our cash game plays over here at rotocurve.com. Those are going to be a lot of the guys that we're putting in our lineups to build our lineups around. There are some other options who we're going to get to in a later video where we talk about some upside plays for tournament. But as for now, that's a solid base that we can give you guys to build your teams here this Thanksgiving weekend and hopefully wind up winning some money. So thank you for joining us here at rotocurve.com. And as always, stay classy, DFS.